Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are, and welcome back to Achampnator Reads. Today I read Chapter 20 of The Last Elf. Robbie lay stretched out in the sun, time passing over her like water over a rock, since the dragon had filled the sky with the green of its wings. The children had not done a day's work. No one was on Iomir's trail. They were eating a little better too. The incredible had happened. In fact, despite the fact that only a few days had passed, the memory of what really occurred had now been contorted and twisted into countless different versions. In the end, the most popular theory was that a dragon had appeared in the sky, carried off poor Iomir, and that the rest of the orphans had been saved by the valiant fighting of Slump, who had finally heroically and blood-drenched sent it packing. The funny thing was that after the third repetition of that story, they really believed it. The truth had disappeared into the earth, like the juice of crushed grapes. And Robbie hadn't been punished, in fact, in the different repetitions of the story, she had become the one who had sounded the alarm. If not exactly a hero, she was at least a protagonist. A few feet away from her, leaning on the fence, Flash told the story to the envoy from Delagar. And then this child, Robbie, gave the alarm. She's the daughter of the most terrible people, really, the worst, she sighed. Fortunately, justice has taken care of them, and thanks to the morals she has learned here, Robbie did exactly the right thing. Admittedly, the love of justice wasn't the only thing involved. There was also fear of the dragon, certainly. A chuckle. But thanks to our influence, she has done the right thing, and you should have seen him, Slump. I mean, moments of emotion, with eyes gazing into the void, and a vaguous smile. He leaped to his feet, took an enormous pannier full of grapes, and brandishing it as a makeshift shield. No punishment for Robbie then. No bloodhounds unleashed after Iomir, who was officially dead. And 4 decorations for Slump. Courage in the face of the enemy, generosity in his treatment of minors, who had been safe from the beast despite their unworthiness, heedlessness of danger, and capacity to honor Delagar, because in the moment of chasing the monster, throwing a pannier of grapes at it. Slump yelled, "For Delagar and her judge administrator," and hurled himself at the dragon. Just like that, my husband flung himself forward with his pannier, shouting like a hero. A little sob of emotion, a few tears. The monster was so terrified that it fled. It spread its enormous wings with what remained of little Iomir in its jaws, and Robbie was glad that Iomir was free and with her family. But she also felt her loss very acutely. More than ever, she yearned to speak to someone, to remember what had really happened, to understand it. A real dragon had appeared in the sky, green, just like in her dream. Dragons weren't extinct, and her dream wasn't a fantasy. The dragon had stood out against the light, but despite the sun in her eyes, Robbie had managed to see a human figure hanging from its feet, dangling dangerously into the void. He could perhaps have looked like prey, something that had been plucked from the ground. But as Robbie watched him, the dangling figure had somersaulted and settled on the dragon's back. He had stayed there for a few moments, black against the blazing sun, He had spread his arms as though to embrace the world. That had been the last clear image, and then the dragon had turned toward the dark mountains, quickly disappearing into them. So the dragon did exist and was carrying someone on its back. The prince? Who, if not the prince? Robbie's mind was split in two. One part believed that the dream was true. The dragon had come to save her with its mere presence. The other part of her believed that there was no logical sense added to it. She wasn't a princess of anything of the kind. A dragon still existed. That was it. A dragon still existed, with a person on top of it, and by pure chance it had arrived at the moment when she had been desperate and in danger, and also by pure chance it was very much like the dragon she had dreamed about every night since her family had been destroyed. A coincidence? But there was also a third thought spinning around in her head. It was a worm thought, a caterpillar thought, hairy and poisonous, like the worms she found in June in cherries that looked lovely but weren't. Perhaps the things Flash and Slump said were true. Perhaps they weren't just lies. Perhaps she wasn't just anybody. Perhaps it was true that her family was bad. A family that Robbie found it repugnant even to pronounce the words in her head. A family that had helped elves. It was horrible. It couldn't be true. Her mother and father were good. It wasn't possible that they could have done something so filthy as to protect an elf, and for money. That had been the accusation, protecting an elf in exchange for gold coins that were then used to buy the house, the farm, the cow, the horse, the sheep, the chickens, and the ore cart. Anyone who protected an elf might have connections with a dragon. And the one protected wasn't just any elf, but the elf. The one who had come to terrorize Delaga the year before her birth. It had been the judge administrator who had saved the city from the fury of the terrible individual. A bloodthirsty beast who would have delighted in slaughtering all the soldiers, the women, the children, and even the chickens in the judge administrator if the judge administrator hadn't stopped the monster with his courage and his valor. The details of that business had never been properly explained, and Robbie did have some doubts about what precisely had happened. If the elf had been so powerful as to rout the soldiers just with the sound of its terrible name, how had the judge administrator been able to confront him? Perhaps the same way Slump had bravely confronted the dragon. Robbie laughed. She felt cheerful once again. And what if it was not true that dragons are bad, that elves are wicked? If it had all been as false as the heroic battle on the Hill of Vines. A heroic battle. Heroic. Flash's voice went on. The blood dripped from his back like... Perhaps dragons really were good, and the dragon had been coming to get her. Robbie closed her eyes. Hunger and sadness vanished, and beneath her eyelids the image formed again. The dragon was so close that its wings filled everything. Robbie could make out the surds of golden skin, alternating with the emerald green scales. Even with her eyes closed, she was aware of someone's presence. Robbie opened her eyes and found herself face to face with Kala, Falco, and Foul Pest. were standing a few feet away from her, arms crossed, while Kala was on her knees, watching her with a mixture of disgust and fear, as though watching a nest of red ants. Robbie realized she was in trouble again. She got to her feet and looked at the three of them. "Where was Ayami gone?" hissed Kala. She was small with blonde hair that fell into her face, emphasizing her grin appearance. Without the two heavies behind her, she would never have dared to confront Robbie, but with them she felt strong. "The dragon ate her. Don't you remember?" Robbie replied serenely. "That's not so," Kala replied in a whisper. "You know, that's not so," Kala replied in a whisper. "You know something. The dragon appeared at precisely the right moment." She looked her up and down. "At your house. You were friends of the elves," she added poisonously. "So, why not dragons as well?" "Alright then, let's ask Flash and find out if what she's saying is true. Or if it's all made up," Robbie suggested angelically. She turned around as though she really was going to address Flash. Falcon Foulpast looked at her, then pursed their lips, shrugged their shoulders, and after one last furious sidelong glance, they left. Only Kala remained. Flash wouldn't let go. The dragon groaned with terror. Between its claws, it still had one of the poor little girl's hands. "That isn't true! That isn't true!" Kala whispered, still full of hate and fury. Her eyes were filled with tears, filled with all of the rancor in the world. Someone had risked their lives to take back Iomir, their child. No one had ever come for Kala. Robbie looked at her for a long time. Then she said something ridiculous. "Sooner or later, someone will come and get you as well." If if it had come out of her mouth all by itself. She listened in horror as she said it. It was meaningless, and it was cruel. Too, because having nothing is infinitely better than having an illusion and seeing it shattered. She looked into Kala's face, half hidden by her filthy blonde fringe, her eyes furious and desperate. Once again, words reached her lips as though of their own accord. "Sooner or later, someone will take you away from here," she confirmed. Kala turned pale beneath a layer of dirt. Her eyes grew white. She brought her hands to her mouth as though to stifle a cry or a groan. Her left hand was missing, its thumb the most important finger of all. Suddenly, in Robbie's head, behind her eyelids, the image formed of Kala's little hand with all 5 fingers attached. She bit her tongue. Still, it bled to keep from saying that her hand might return to normal, because that would really have been too ridiculous and cruel. "Are you a real witch?" Kala asked in a whisper. "Are you from a family of witches? Is that why you are friends with elves? But listen, you really know things, don't you? Don't you?" Robbie didn't reply. Slump was dripping blood and mud. You should have. Slump was dripping blood and mud. You should have seen it. Blood and mud," Flash was saying. Then her story broke off with a strangled cry. Above their heads, enormous, splendid, and menacing, flew the dragon with emerald wings. On its back, a tiny white figure could just be seen. Howls of terror spread, and people ran in all directions, forgetting his warlike and heroic precedents. Slump suddenly roused himself from his snores to dash to the nearest barn as fast as his legs would carry him. The envoy from Delaga, who had brought Slump his direct decorations, was too intent on escaping in the opposite direction to notice Slump flee. Flash, too, ended up in the barn, but before she got there, she stumbled over one of the smaller children, and her dust blue tunic with its points of silver thread freed was now a mess of mud and straw. Falcon Foulpass ran into the distance. Robbie stayed where she was, watching the dragon. A vacuous smile formed on her lips. The dragon, after circling once more, wheeled around toward the dark mountains, flew over its peaks, and disappeared behind them. Clearly its lair could not be far away. Kala was standing close to Robbie and went on watching her, frozen. She hadn't run away, either. Finally, she dared to ask, "Now that Iomir isn't here, can I sleep near you?" Robbie didn't need to think about it. "Of course," she replied. Guys and girls, that was chapter 20 of The Last Elf. And with that I see ya.